Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. The United States and Iran signed a landmark agreement aimed at ending the nearly 4-month war, and U.S. gas prices now dropping below $4 for the first time since March. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth is announcing a 6-month review of America's support for Europe and NATO. How is the head of NATO responding? New details tonight in the alleged UFC terror plot. Federal authorities say the suspected ringleader is an illegal immigrant from Mexico accused of helping plan a mass-casualty attack at the White House Freedom 250 event. What investigators say the group discussed, including snipers and drones. 11 illegal immigrants charged for benefit fraud in Massachusetts. The Justice Department announces which benefit programs are affected. Is the U.S. ready for the 2026 FIFA World Cup? What are the challenges, and how does the performance so far compare to the 1994 World Cup? We discuss this. A championship 53 years in the making. Knicks fans packed the streets of Manhattan for a historic ticker tape parade.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Oil prices are tumbling down as an agreement between the U.S. and Iran officially takes effect. Vice President J.D. Vance rejecting what he calls misrepresentation of Iran wins in the Memorandum of Understanding. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao with the latest on the Vice President at the White House briefing earlier today.
So Vice President J.D. Vance held a briefing at the White House earlier this morning after the U.S.-Iran Memorandum of Understanding took effect after President Trump last night at the Palace of Versailles officially put his signature on the physical copy. Now, Vice President J.D. Vance saying that the clock has started for the 60-day window for the U.S. and Iran to further negotiate and hash out the details for an even more final deal. And he also says that progress has been seen after this memorandum of understanding takes effect, including, for example, on the military side, he said for the second night in a row, Iran did not shoot at any ships in the Strait of Hormuz. And on the U.S. side, the U.S. blockade has been officially lifted. That's again confirmed by Central Command this morning. The Vice President saying that the Central Command has now allowed more than a dozen ships to go through its naval blockade, as that's not in effect anymore, and both sides are honoring the early parts of this agreement. Now, economically, for Americans in our country, especially, a Vice President saying that Americans are seeing relief at the pump as gas prices are now going down as well. Watch.
Oil prices are down nearly at their level from the pre-war conflict. Gas prices dropped below $4 a gallon today for the first time since the conflict. And importantly, they're going to keep falling further given how low oil prices are. On the military side, the Iranians for the second night in a row did not shoot at any ships in the Strait of Hormuz. So far, they are honoring their end of the commitment.
Energy prices fell again today on the official signing of the deal. Brent crude oil index is now below $77 a barrel, approaching levels that have not been seen since the start of the conflict back in March. And President Trump today taking to Truth Social, posting, quote, "Oil is flowing. Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. The stock markets are roaring, jobs are at records, and prices are dropping. Our country is strong, safe, and respected like never before." Now, at the G7 press conference back in France, President Trump telling NTD's Mario Otsu about the impact of lower oil prices on the overall U.S. economy. Watch.
Thank you, President Trump. Oil prices are now plummeting. How do you see this agreement further affecting energy prices in the U.S. and the U.S. economy in the long term?
Well, first of all, thank you for the word plummeting, because that's what's happening. Oil prices are plummeting. And that means oil prices are going to come down. Now that the oil is coming down, you're going to see everything follow. Everything follows the cost of energy. And we're going to end up having the lowest energy anywhere in the world.
Senior U.S. officials laid out to us during a call yesterday about the specific terms in the memorandum, including that starting immediately, the U.S. and Iran would cease its conflict, including in Lebanon. It also means that the U.S. would end the naval blockade, which has now happened, and that Iran would open the Strait of Hormuz with no tolls. And also says that the U.S. will also issue waivers so that Iran can export oil and spells out provisions for reopening the strait. It also means that Iran will have to give its enriched uranium stockpile to the U.S. to handle it, including for downblending it on site under international supervision. It would also means that Iran will commit to achieving a final deal with the U.S. over the next 60 days. And if it actually complies with everything in this agreement, it would potentially get the U.S. to lift all its sanctions, as well as a $300 billion reconstruction fund that's not funded by the U.S., though is coordinated by the U.S. as well as regional partners, which administration says will be mainly from private investments. Now, Vice President J.D. Vance during the conference laid out the main idea of the agreement, saying that now that the U.S. has destroyed Iran's nuclear program, it would set out a foundation for the U.S. to use verifiable mechanisms to ensure that Iran cannot further develop a nuclear program. And of course, if it actually keeps its word, the U.S. will give it sanctions relief. The vice president also lays out the main differences between this deal and what's struck under the Obama administration. Let's take a look.
The Obama nuclear deal allowed enrichment. Ours will not. The Obama deal allowed the accumulation of stockpiled weapons-grade material. Ours is actually leading to the destruction of that stockpile of enriched material. So there are many differences. The Obama deal gave them over $1 billion of American money.
And the vice president also pushing back on some criticism on the latest deal. For example, people who say that it's giving Iran to benefit too early. The vice president making clear that Iran is not getting anything up front, and for any actual benefit to be accrued, it needs to show its action. The vice president specifically defends the part that the U.S. will allow Iran to now again sell its crude oil, saying that that has been the case actually before this war started. Iran has been selling its oil for many, many years, and a previous sanction regime only allowed countries like China to get a fat discount, as other countries were not allowed to buy Iran's oil. Now, the vice president says this will allow Iran to really sell its oil to other countries, but under more transparency and more U.S. inspection. And the end result will be free flow of energy, as well as no situation where China is getting that discount. And here's the vice president talking about how the verification process is at work. Watch.
And so we're going to reward conduct, and we're not going to reward any words, whether they're written on a sheet of paper or not. There's a lot of discussion, the MOU, the gentleman's agreements, the final deal. Words don't matter, ladies and gentlemen. We're about verification. We can slap everything right back on if the Iranians don't make the deal that we expect.
Now, initially, both the U.S. and Iran were expected to formally sign the deal Friday in Switzerland, but as we know, President Trump has already put a signature on the physical copy last night. Now, U.S. and Iranian negotiators are expected to hash out the details through further talks in Switzerland, but the timing of that is now uncertain. Vice President saying that he still expects to go, but he's not sure when exactly. Back to you.
Okay, Iris, thank you. The U.S. Navy has lifted its blockade of Iranian ports amid an initial agreement to end the war between the United States and Iran. Central Command saying American warships would remain in the region to ensure the deal holds. The end of the blockade comes after Vice President J.D. Vance told reporters that 12.5 million barrels of oil went through the Strait of Hormuz yesterday. President Trump touted the initial agreement on Truth Social, posting, quote, "The United States is committed to peace, and we encourage everyone in the Middle East region to maintain their commitment to allowing our negotiations to beautifully unfold." The president added that he expects a complete ceasefire on all fronts, including Lebanon, where Israel has been carrying out strikes against Hezbollah. U.S. Navy ships, including 2 aircraft carriers, remain in the waters off Iran. The Iran deal, or the Memorandum of Understanding, has been electronically signed between the United States and Iran. Joining us now to discuss is Gerard Filitti, Middle East affairs analyst and attorney specializing in international law. So Gerard, good afternoon. So simple question here. Do you think about 3 or 4 months ago, at the beginning of this war, if Trump asked the leaders of Iran to sign any kind of deal, would the regime have signed it?
It's very difficult to say what the regime would have signed 3 or 4 months ago. I think the issue ultimately is what they're signing now, because we have to remember that right now we have a memorandum of understanding that is precisely about the Strait of Hormuz, which was not an issue 3 or 4 months ago, and it's leaving to additional negotiations a final deal. So perhaps we could have gotten here without the war, perhaps not. But ultimately, President Trump has been able to get Iran to the ceasefire and to negotiate on its nuclear weapon development.
So, Middle East experts have been saying throughout this whole operation that if Iranian leaders accept U.S. terms, it may be dangerous because they will face backlash from domestic ideological hardliners. Because, Iran spent decades portraying resistance to the U.S., right, as a core principle. So leaders may be accused of betraying these principles if they sign the deal. But the deal they've signed explicitly says, quote, "The Islamic Republic of Iran reaffirms that it shall not procure or develop nuclear weapons." So, Gerard, this is different because Iran would not have signed this maybe at the beginning of this war. I don't think you can separate Iran's signing of the MOU from the diplomatic and military pressure the U.S. has put on the regime. What do you think?
Well, I think what's interesting is that Iran's pledge that it's not seeking nuclear weapons is the same position that they have had for years, even going back to the JCPOA and before. Iran has always claimed that its enrichment purposes were for peaceful purposes and not for nuclear weapons, even though they were clearly enriching to a level that they did not need for peaceful reactors. So this is language that we've heard before from Iran, and there's very little in the way of trust now that they actually mean what they say, especially because we have heard this rhetoric before. But in terms of this deal, in terms of negotiating, 3 or 4 months ago, before this war started, we were not even in a position where Iran was willing to negotiate. They were taking a hardline position that they were free to do whatever they wanted within their country, and they were not yet at the negotiating table. So this conflict, this military action did at the very least bring Iran to the negotiating table.
So on top of that, I want to point out something else. So I saw a headline by the Guardian newspaper, which said, "Anger among Iranian hardliners at terms of deal agreed with U.S." And it goes on to say, quote, goes on to say a quote from a statement of an Iranian member of parliament that said, "The fact that they say we won and America has retreated is a blatant lie." So The Guardian has been mostly critical of Trump during this war. So the fact that it came out with a story like this means, at least maybe there's some truth there. And that means if Iran hardliners don't like the deal, then the U.S. may be, at the very least, doing some things right. What are your comments?
Much like with communist China, it's very difficult to trust at face value what comes out of the Islamic Republic. Even when it is critical of its own regime, it may be that way for political purposes, for domestic consumption, or for propaganda purposes. Ultimately, Iran does see that the regime is unchanged. The hardliners are actually the same people who are in control of the government, and they're the ones who need to approve and have been approving these negotiations. So whatever the statements that we get, they reflect or don't reflect. The truth is that it's these people, the hardliners, who agreed to the Memorandum of Understanding. Now, what they're saying for domestic political consumption, that's one thing. What they're saying to potentially embarrass the United States is another. But ultimately, the hardliners themselves feel like this was a good deal for them, which is why they agreed to it.
Okay, so Trump said yesterday at the G7 meeting that Operation Epic Fury has achieved its objective. And I want to ask you, at this exact moment, Gerard, is Iran able to make a nuclear weapon?
At this moment, no, it's not. At this moment, it still needs to dig out, it needs to reinvest in its facilities, and it needs to continue its work if it wants to make a nuclear weapon. But it's important to point out that this is where we were last summer as well, when the US and Israel struck Iran, saying that they were close to a weapon and that they destroyed Iran's ability to make a bomb. And yet here we are almost a year later, we went back to Iran because they had reconstituted their ability. So the answer is today they cannot make a bomb, but if we give them money, if we give them time, and if we don't verify their commitments, it's very likely that they will go back to enrichment and trying to make a bomb regardless of what they say. That's the experience that we've had with Iran.
Okay, is the Iranian regime weaker now than before the war started, economically speaking as well? And given the fact that making a nuclear bomb takes a lot of money. So if the economy is weaker, that means the ability to make a nuclear weapon, at the very least, is delayed even more.
Well, the Iranian economy has been weak even before this war. The sanctions were having a significant effect on its ability to maintain an economy that was functional. They were in recession for many years. The value of their currency was plummeting for many years, not just after this war. So this war did take a toll on them, but we also have to remember that this is a hardline dictatorial regime. The money that they will now be getting from the sale of oil and the release of of money that's being stopped by the US, which is around $24 or $25 billion. This is all money that the regime could very easily use to reconstituting their missiles, their drones, and the nuclear weapons program. There's no guarantee that this money will be used for feeding, for restoring infrastructure, or for hospitals. So Iran is getting a boon to its economy right now, more so than it has had in the last few years.
Okay, but Iran has to consider the fact that the U.S. is watching, and if any attempt is made to make a nuclear weapon, I don't know, maybe more bombings will happen. President Trump has said if a deal is not reached within 60 days, the U.S. could resume military action.
Well, that's exactly the thing. The U.S. can always come back in, and that's one thing that is keeping that may well serve to keep Iran in check. That the U.S. has committed that if this negotiation does not produce a good final result, and if Iran continues trying to develop nuclear weapons, then we would strike again. We would resume, or at least have the option of resuming military action. And we have seen that our military action is very effective. It's very devastating of these nuclear sites, not permanently, but for a long time. But also, we need to point out that it's not necessary for the agreement to be reached within 60 days, even though that's what the goal is. Iran and the U.S. can agree to keep talking beyond those 60 days if a goal is not reached. So ultimately, there's no actual firm deadline. This is more commitment to try to reach a final deal as quickly as possible within 60 days.
And I think there's a difference between this deal, this MOU, between Obama's JCPOA. Historically, has there been any kind of deal with Iran throughout history where it's incentive-based, where the country has to demonstrate good behavior before getting benefits?
Well, that's the thing. I think it's also it's very hard to compare this deal with a JCPOA because the JCPOA was an actual deal about nuclear material. What we have now is a pledge to work towards a deal. So it's really like comparing apples with oranges. We knew what the terms were of a nuclear deal under JCPOA, even though we may not have liked it. And even though we knew that Iran was cheating, at least we had fixed terms. Here, we're still negotiating. But ultimately, this is a different approach. With the JCPOA, we also promised or held out the promise of financial benefit if they complied, but Iran never did. Here, after we've used military force as well, I think that sends a clearer message to Iran that we will take whatever action is necessary if a deal is reached for them to comply with it.
But even if we're not having a deal exactly at this moment, we're working towards a deal, it's still the intention that even when we do reach a deal, that it's going to be performance-based. So isn't that still a key difference, even though we don't have a deal at this exact moment?
Correct. That's the main difference, is that this would be performance-based, but the incentives here to Iran are huge. We're talking not just about money that's being released by the U.S. and the end of sanctions, but also a $300 billion investment fund that would be made available to reconstruct or for Iran's purposes. So these are huge incentives for Iran to not develop and to stay compliant with the terms of a deal. How we structure that, how we actually monitor compliance, that's going to be key.
Okay, just one final question here. I like to make the comparison. Let's say a law enforcement officer arrests a criminal at this moment, and then he goes to jail. After a certain amount of years, he gets released out of jail and he commits another crime, that doesn't mean the initial arrest was a failure, right? The initial arrest of this criminal is still considered a good thing, and I want to make that comparison to the current situation now. If we stop the Iranian regime from getting a nuclear bomb at this moment, we cannot say that Operation Epic Fury is a failure. The question is, and I want to ask you this, how do we ensure 50 years down the road the Iranian regime doesn't start a nuclear weapons program again?
Well, look, the short answer and the difficult one is that we can't. The only way that we can deter nuclear development is to bring Iran fully into the world of the world of nations, the community of nations, to make sure that they have a liberal democratic government, which they do not have, that is more interested in the economic well-being of its people than the status quo of a regime, of a hardline regime. So ultimately, this will be the challenge with Iran, because it is not an openly democratic society, does not have the same values as the majority of the world. So that makes it difficult to trust that 20 years, 50 years from now, they will not have a nuclear weapon. This is why force is a good deterrent. This is why economic sanctions and pressure is a good deterrent. And on the other hand is the carrot, the deal to give them money, to give them the opportunity to be able to develop their economy if they comply with the standards that the rest of the world has set. So ultimately, it is whether Iran is willing to come into the world, a community of nations, without their dictatorial and repressive regime.
Okay, well, Gerard, sounds good. It's always great to speak with you. Thank you for your time today.
Oh, thank you, Don. A pleasure.
New details in the UFC terror plot. DHS says the suspected ringleader is an illegal immigrant from Mexico. The agency says he and other co-conspirators plan to carry out mass killings at the White House Freedom 250 event last Sunday. Abraham Alvarez was arrested in Omaha, Nebraska on Sunday. The DHS says he is a Mexican national who overstayed a B-2 visitor visa in 2001. The Obama administration granted him DACA status in 2014. The FBI says Alvarez was responsible for planning, organizing, and directing the planned attack. In a group chat with 4 others, he detailed the use of snipers and drones to kill as many people as possible. They now face federal charges of conspiracy to commit murder and conspiracy to commit violence on White House grounds. ICE has lodged a detainer for Alvarez. A top DHS official says, quote, "This illegal alien from Mexico should never have been allowed in our country. He will face justice and swiftly be removed from our country." To discuss this further, we're joined by Simon Hankinson, a senior research fellow at the Border Security and Immigration Center of the Heritage Foundation. So Simon, thank you so much for being here with us today. Now, we've learned about the suspect being the ringleader of this plot, alleged plot. The Department of Homeland Security says Alvarez is an illegal immigrant from Mexico who overstayed his visa. So can you break down for us about his immigration status and why it matters to this case?
Yes, well, under the Obama administration, there was something called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, became known as DACA, and sometimes the recipients were known as Dreamers. And several times Congress has attempted to enact that into law so that it's permanent. But what it basically means is someone who came into this country as a child, even though they now may be in their 20s or 30s, like this guy looks to be, was given deferred action, i.e., they would not continue to prosecute the case for them being in the country illegally. It's like they put the file on the side of the desk and left it there gathering dust. It has been considered unlawful. It's made it to the Supreme Court, I think. I don't think they've come down with a decision. I'm not quite sure where the case stands right now. But there are something like 800,000 possible beneficiaries from DACA. And when you listen to the mainstream media, they're all honor students and, contributors to society and doctors and lawyers and engineers. And well, I am personally a critic of it because I think it is, well, I don't think it is completely unlawful. It was a presidential decree. We have immigration laws, and we've had, unfortunately, more than one time a president who was willing to just set the law aside. And this is a deferred action, which is similar to deferred prosecution when you have prosecutors in the United States that simply decide not to prosecute certain crimes. or prosecutorial discretion, where the Department of Homeland Security under Mayorkas and Biden essentially just let hundreds of thousands of cases go. So that's another way to undermine the law. Is it's not just passing new laws or changing the laws, but you can also ignore them. If you don't enforce them, then they might as well not exist. So that's my chief beef with DACA. And as I say, it has many supporters who say, look, these people have been here their whole lives. They were brought as children. And I'm sympathetic to that argument. But I think not only the precedent, but also the blanket idea of amnestying 800,000 people is insane. Because among those 800,000, as I mentioned before, are a higher than normal percentage of criminals, of people who are incapable of working and have never worked and are otherwise injurious to our society.
So is it your view then this was preventable, where potentially a significant number of people could have been killed or injured at the White House event?
Well, yeah, like all crimes committed by people here illegally, it was utterly preventable. And we have a map of preventable crimes that we use as a visual here at Heritage. It's only a tiny proportion of those crimes, but if you look it up, you'll see that there are black dots all over this country. Everything from killing people in drunk driving. There was an illegal immigrant who killed 15 Amish in a van the other day, but it happens every single week. There's case after case. It could be drunk driving, it could be robbery, it could be rape, it could be murder. But any crime committed by someone who was supposed to not be in the United States or had been ordered removed or should have been in jail for a prior conviction or prior charge, either immigration or otherwise, is preventable.
So, I mean, is this further evidence? Does this erase any further doubt that illegal immigration is a national security issue?
Well, I've certainly never been under the impression that it's not a national security issue. I think people who defend illegal immigration obviously want to downplay incidents like this. Now, I don't know who the other members of the conspiracy were. It seems like there were several U.S. citizens. It sounds like a mixed bag, which is often the case. It seems a very left-wing, anti-capitalist, anti-Semitic sort of operation. We're learning still more details about it. But as far as the one individual who was here on DACA, who was from Mexico, goes, that particular guy, if he was the ringleader, could have been prevented from doing this if the law had been carried out. The others, I'd have to look at each case as they come out.
So in addition to illegal border crossings, do you think there should be a more focus on visa overstays as well?
They're equally important. We have about 500,000 visa overstays a year out of maybe 50, 70 million visitors. That's a lot of people. Now, not all of them stay forever. They might overstay by 6 months or a year, but many of those people claim asylum. And most of those asylum claims, I know from personal and professional experience, are bogus. These are people who lied when they got a visa, saying they were going to go to Disney World or visit grandma and then come home again. But all the time they had the intention of remaining in the United States to work illegally. Sometimes CBP will find documents or things on their phone that indicate their plans, but more often than not, they'll get away with it. So yeah, we have to be serious about enforcing the law, not just on people crossing the border illegally, but also overstaying their visas. We want to welcome as many people here for things like the World Cup as want to come, as long as they obey our rules and go home again when they're finished, which every other country on earth also wants and also has laws that they, in most cases, enforce.
So this administration has been tackling visa overstays by the means of having a bond when they cross the border or at the airport. I mean, you have any other ideas of how we can, really ensure that people don't overstay their visa? Is there any methods to do that?
Well, the first method is you apply the law. Section 214B of the Immigration Nationality Act says that an alien must have a home abroad that they do not intend to abandon. In other words, they've got to show a consular officer convincing evidence that they're going to go home at the end of the trip. Now, I applied that, I don't know how many times, probably 50,000 times in my career. Some officers are lax. Most, I say, are pretty good about it. But if you have a country, and we've had some recently in Africa, where the rate of overstay was like 40%, then obviously we need to lower the issuance rate until it gets very, very close to zero. We'll never get zero. Some people will overstay. It's going to happen even from Europe and developed countries. but the number ought to be very, very low. And if the rate is too high, we ought to stop issuing visas in that country. And then, meantime, when people overstay, we need to arrest them, detain them. If they have an asylum claim or whatever claim they want to make to stay in the United States, they should do that. They get their due process, and then they have to go home. People have to understand that they're kind of making a contract with the United States when they get a visa. They're coming here to do what they say they're going to do, and then they're going to leave. And if they break that contract, there'll be consequences.
Okay, Simon, just one final thing. What is your assessment right now of this administration's efforts against illegal immigration?
Well, compared to the Biden administration, you really couldn't fail to do well, right? So I think they're making extraordinary progress. If you look at the border, we were looking at anywhere from 100,000 to 350,000 was the worst ever monthly total of illegal aliens crossing into the United States, and most of them being released, which is why we have 5 to 10 million of them still in the country. The Trump administration put a stop to that. They're not releasing anybody now, which is extraordinary, which is why you don't hear about it. And then they're making an effort to enforce in the interior. A lot of us wish that effort was bigger, but obviously they're fighting some serious headwinds. Well-paid, well-funded, well-organized activists from Antifa and other groups, and places like Minneapolis and Chicago and Los Angeles and New York, where local politicians make it extremely difficult for ICE to do its job, where they tell the police not to cooperate. So there are a lot of headwinds against the administration, but it is their constitutional duty to enforce the law, and I think they're doing the best they can.
All right, sounds good, Simon. Let's leave it there for today, and really appreciate you talking with us.
Thank you.
15 people are facing charges for over $1 million in benefit fraud in Massachusetts. The Justice Department says 11 of them are illegal immigrants.
We will follow the facts and the law to bring criminal actors to justice, regardless of the perpetrator's citizenship, immigration status, position, or title. We will not shrug our shoulders at fraud or acquiesce to it as a necessary evil or an unavoidable destiny. We are resolved to do everything possible to battle back against fraud and protect the programs that benefit the American taxpayers.
The DOJ says the defendants are charged and arrested for over $1.4 million in SNAP benefit fraud, mass health benefit fraud, and disability and unemployment benefit fraud. Some of them also face charges for Social Security fraud and identity theft. At least 6 of the individuals are Dominican nationals living unlawfully in Massachusetts. 1 is an Indian national, 4 are U.S. citizens, and 4 suspected illegal immigrants have been living under stolen identities. DHS Secretary Markwin Mullen says the illegal immigrants will be deported from the U.S. after facing. The Justice Department is suing Philadelphia over a city ban prohibiting federal agents from wearing masks. The DOJ saying the law threatens their safety. The Philadelphia law also prohibits the use of unmarked vehicles in the city and requires federal officers to wear individual identifiers. The department said its lawsuit comes as federal agents face harassment, doxing, and acts of violence. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche has instructed the department's civil division to identify state and local laws, policies, and practices that hinder federal operations. Today's lawsuit is the latest in a series of similar actions taken against policies in Virginia, Connecticut, New Jersey, and California. Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays is dismissing a sprawling criminal case that alleged the president's former colleagues had tried to overturn the president's 2020 laws in the state. The move is to avoid a Friday deadline for starting new grand jury proceedings. Prosecutors said there isn't enough time to present the evidence requested by the defense. The state's attorney general is vowing to bring the case back to a grand jury at a later date in hopes of securing another indictment. Courts have dismissed similar cases in Michigan and Georgia, and a special prosecutor dropped a similar federal case in late 2024. The fake electors scheme involved alternate electors from 7 states where Joe Biden was declared the winner. They believed they were putting in a procedural vote for President Trump in case legal challenges over the 2020 election results were successful. Should marijuana users be allowed to use guns, or own guns rather? The Supreme Court is bucking the Trump administration in a case that pits gun rights against drug use. The 1968 Federal Gun Control Act bans firearm possession for anyone who is an unlawful user or addicted to any controlled substance. Ali Hemeni is an American-Pakistani dual citizen that lives in Texas. He was charged under the law in 2023 following an FBI raid that found marijuana and cocaine in his home. Hemeni moved to dismiss the charge, arguing it violated his Second Amendment rights. The Fifth Circuit sided with him in 2025, and the Supreme Court did the same today in an unanimous ruling. The Trump administration defended the Gun Control Act in the case. They also added that Hemeni has alleged ties to Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. The justices ruled that certain prosecutions under the act intrude on the Second Amendment. They said the government cannot disarm someone simply for using marijuana a few times a week. Americans are finally getting some relief at the pump. Regular gas is averaging a hair below $4 a gallon for the first time since March 30th. AAA says it's $3.99 and 9/10 of a penny. Gas Buddy puts it at $3.98. Brent crude and WTI crude are trading below $80 a barrel. That follows a wartime high of more than $114 for the global benchmark. So what does the ceasefire mean for shipping? Experts say traffic through the Strait of Hormuz may take months to return to normal. Industry analysts estimate up to 600 vessels and roughly 20,000 stranded sailors must first be moved out of the Persian Gulf before regular traffic can resume. Shipping companies remain cautious, citing security concerns after more than 100 days of disruption. Analysts say clearing the backlog alone could take up to 2 months. Meanwhile, Gulf oil and gas production may not fully recover to pre-war levels until next year. For now, insurers and shipping operators are taking a wait-and-see approach. Oil prices have fallen to their lowest since the war began after President Trump signed a deal with Iran. Joining us now to discuss is Rod Martin, geopolitical analyst and founder and CEO of Martin Capital. So, Rod, thank you for joining us today. You know, many critics before was talking about how this conflict will send oil prices, gasoline prices up, but we're now seeing oil fall a lot in a short period of time. So what do you say to those concerns today?
Well, it's exactly as we predicted. We've been saying on here for months, the minute this war is over, all of these prices are going to stabilize, they're going to return to normal, and the long-term result is going to be better than what was normal. The first and foremost reason for that is that the threat to the Strait of Hormuz is not a new thing. The Iranians have been holding that over the world's head since the 80s, as a result of which there's a risk premium priced into the price of oil everywhere and has been for most of our lifetimes. That's going to go away, and it's going to go away for very specific reasons. Oman is now going to replace the Strait of Hormuz for the UAE. They have left OPEC. The UAE they have doubled their capacity. They are going to ship it over land. They're going to avoid the strait entirely. You're seeing tremendous increases in the capacity of the Saudis to ship oil to the Red Sea. The Iranians are not going to be able to hold them under threat. And I expect we're going to see the GCC as a whole begin to look at pipeline options that take them, if not to the Red Sea or the Gulf of Oman, possibly all the way to the Mediterranean, possibly through Israel, if we can get an Abraham Accords deal inked with a few more of them. And that just changes the equation entirely. The Iranians are never going to be able to hold us under this threat again. And the president has succeeded in shifting a great deal of the world's energy supply from the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of America.
So speaking of a great deal, in your mind, has there been any deal with Iran where it's purely performance-based, where Iran only gets things if they behave?
We have been living on Iranian promises most of my lifetime. They've never kept one yet. I thought the president was incredibly clear yesterday in his remarks on the point that if Iran should transgress its obligations, spoken and written, both, it's getting bombed, and we're just not going to let up. We're not actually reducing our presence in the Gulf and in the Arabian Sea. the blockade isn't gone. And to the degree we slack off on it a bit as a result of this deal, we can reassert it almost immediately. There's simply no way for them to cheat as long as Donald Trump is willing to bomb. And the reason we got to an MOU ultimately is the 3 days of bombing that led up to it. The Iranians realized he is serious. He's not just playing for the midterms. He is actually willing to inflict the damage necessary to leave Iran in terrible, forgive the term, straits. So I think that's exactly what we'll see going forward. And honestly, with very little impact on the price of oil going forward. And I'm really excited about the new transport capacity we're seeing in the Middle East, but I'm a lot more excited about the growth of U.S. exports to East Asia and to Europe.
Okay, so earlier you mentioned that geopolitical premium risk premium is going away. In your mind, how long would it take for oil prices to go back to pre-war levels? Because now traders are shifting their attention back to fundamentals. But, we still have to consider the damaged facilities and ports. So when do you think we'll go back to pre-war levels?
Well, there's no question about that. It may be 12 months before we see these numbers hit what I would like to see. But during that entire time, you're talking about significantly increased oil production as well. And one of the fields that we must not lose track of course, is Venezuela, where we are going in with American technology and American competence to restart a lot of production that was lost over the last 20 years simply because the socialist regime that nationalized those oil fields didn't know how to run them. And we had gotten down to just an abysmally low export number over the last decade in particular, but the last 5 years have just been unbelievable. So that's all coming back. And that directly affects U.S. gas prices because we hold most of the refineries that can actually process that Venezuelan heavy crude right here on the Gulf Coast. So that goes straight into American tanks. That reduces the price. Additionally, as I said, the UAE is in the process of doubling production. That is a huge break with what they have always done under the OPEC regime, seeking to keep the price of oil artificially high. Doubling production is a really big deal for global prices. Shipping it by pipeline across Oman, in some ways, is an even bigger deal. And the East-West pipeline in Saudi Arabia going to Yanbu, same thing. It just de-risks everything, and it equals a lot more crude, and in the American market, actually quite a lot more gasoline as well.
You talk about increased production. How big is the hole right now for global oil inventories that needs to be filled?
Well, not as big, I think, as people are thinking, because you will recall that a few weeks ago, the president gave Russia waivers for some of their oil exports. So for the first time since the beginning of the Ukraine war, they were able to sell some of this oil on the open market at something approaching normal prices. They have been selling most of that oil to China and previously India as well at an incredibly steep discount to market. So they have been able to help us fill the gap. Increased production here has helped us fill the gap. And that's really the key thing. There were also an awful lot of barrels on the water when the war broke out. That has not completely gone away. And of course, there are a lot of tankers in the Gulf that are now, it's not so much that they're able to get out. They were probably able to get out throughout the war. It wasn't insurable. They couldn't maintain insurance to get those tankers through the strait. That was the real threat. And now that goes away too. And this is where the president's facility through the Development Finance Corporation to underwrite some of that maritime risk really kicks in and makes a difference. We can get shipping moving quicker, I think, than most of the pessimists believe.
So, Rod, I want to talk a bit more about the deal itself, the MOU. There's some criticism surrounding it. Isn't it the case that usually after a war, that neither side achieves, maximum goals that they want? But the important thing is that Iran is not getting a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, nobody ever gets everything they want. And here's what we got. We decimated the top leadership of Iran, the people who were responsible for carrying out terrorist attacks all over the region. And yes, against the United States, unquestionably, going back 47 years. But most of their targets are other Muslims, or Israel, one or the other. The Houthis are a creature of Tehran. Hezbollah is a creature of Tehran, a proxy army for the regime. And those guys have done far more damage to Lebanon than they have to Israel. Same thing with Hamas. So that layer of the regime's leadership and the money they were using to finance that and the factories they were using to build arms to supply that, that's gone. And we have taken out, depending on the estimates, you're hearing something between 70 and 80% of Iran's ballistic missile capacity. That's gone. And the nuclear sites are largely gone. So this is a thumping military victory. And I can understand why some people are kind of bummed on the terms of the MOU because, okay, we didn't get to regime change. Well, you weren't going to do that militarily from the United States without a ground invasion. That was always, and the president said from the beginning, always going to have to come from the Iranian people. And my guess is that's still very much on the table because the regime has been greatly weakened. It has been nearly bankrupted, and the people are no happier than they were in January. I think we've probably been using this time to arm and train key Iranians inside the country. I suspect that the worst days for the regime still lie ahead.
So for those people who are saying things about this MOU, do you think as it stands today, the 14 points in this MOU 3 or 4 months ago, where the Iranian regime had its military, its Navy, do you think that regime would have signed the 14 points today 3 or 4 months ago?
Absolutely not. And honestly, wouldn't have signed it a month ago or 2 weeks ago. The impetus for the signing was the 3 days of bombing that came immediately before the agreement on Sunday. We demonstrated something that they simply didn't believe, that the American president would back up his words with force after he had stopped. They had gambled on this erroneous view of the Americans that we were scared of this, that we didn't have the stomach for this, that we wouldn't continue this. And honestly, Trump gave them a dose of what Nixon and Kissinger gave North Vietnam in December of '72. Now, hopefully, we don't screw up over the next 2 or 3 years like the Democrats did in the early '70s and end up throwing away what we won. But the truth is, this is a military victory that led to a peace deal that, while imperfect, is massively superior to what we had. And the president isn't kidding. Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. That was the single most important thing that had to happen. And being humiliated in this way makes the regime far weaker with the people. We saw an instance of that this week when the IRGC had its people out in the streets chanting against America, and they start chanting against the Iranian foreign minister and calling for his death. The IRGC and the people we're dealing with are split, and there's an opportunity in that to bring down the regime.
Okay, Rod, just one final question here. For a while, military experts, Middle East experts are saying Iran is in a dilemma. If they don't sign the deal, they will face military consequences from the U.S. If they do sign the deal, they're going to face backlash from ideological hardliners within the regime, which they argue could be even more dangerous than external pressure. So the fact that they even signed this deal, if not a surrender, is that at least Iran bending a knee to the U.S.?
It absolutely is, and that's how it's being seen in Iran. There's no way to escape that. You can't sit down at a table and make a deal with the great Satan, as they have been calling us since the 70s, and not look weak. And they can spin it all these different ways. They can tell all kinds of lies in Iranian propaganda about what they got out of us and this, that, and the other. They're not getting any of that out of us without performance. There isn't going to be any sanctions relief or blockade relief or release of any of their escrowed funds. None of that is happening until and unless they show concrete compliance, first and foremost having to do with what the president calls the nuclear dust, which really isn't. It's actually highly enriched uranium, 60% or more, that they moved in the immediate run-up to our bombing of Fordo and Isfahan last year. And we have to recover that to make sure that they can't build the 11 bombs that they arrogantly told Trump's negotiators at the outset of this back in the winter. You know, we can build all these bombs. You didn't get us. Well, they're just waving a red flag in front of a bull, and Trump took them. So no, this is a loss. This is functionally a surrender. It is not the kind of unconditional surrender that we saw with Japan or Germany after World War II. That almost never happens, but they lost this war. And if they really want a rematch, Trump will give it to them.
Can't imagine they would want a rematch after what happened to them over the past 3 to 4 months. But I like your term, a functional surrender. Rod, thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you.
The Treasury is sanctioning Lebanese officials. The department says were aligned with Hezbollah. The department's Office of Foreign Assets Control saying that individuals are obstructing peace negotiations with Israel. The Treasury also sanctioned individuals in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Oman, who the department says were raising funds for Hezbollah. According to the Treasury, the individuals used front companies to generate revenue for the Iran-backed terror group. The latest sanctions come amid an initial peace deal between the United States and Iran. The agreement is intended to halt hostilities across all fronts, including Lebanon, where Israel has been carrying out strikes against Hezbollah. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth is announcing a 6-month review of America's support for Europe and NATO. He says Europe was never supposed to simply rely on the U.S. The head of NATO is already responding. NTD's international correspondent, Arian Pasdar, has the story.
I'm announcing today a 6-month Department of War review that will examine America's force posture and basing in Europe.
Secretary of War Pete Hegseth announcing that Europe must finally go back to defending itself instead of relying on the US. He says this is better for Europe itself, while also guaranteeing that American forces can be used for America's global needs. He explained the structure of the upcoming 6-month review.
This review will be conducted with the benefit of inputs from the United States military, from European Command. It will involve consultations with the U.S. Congress and with our allies.
According to Hegseth, the goal of NATO was for Europe to become a military power allied with the US after World War II. He says it should have never been the case for tens of thousands of American troops to be stationed across Europe for multiple decades.
As Dwight Eisenhower himself said as early as 1951, if in 10 years all American troops stationed in Europe for national defense purposes have not been returned to the United States, then this whole process will have failed.
Hegseth made the remarks at a NATO meeting of defense ministers on Thursday. NATO chief Mark Rutte is already responding.
What he tried to do today is to keep the pressure on, and I think that's good. That's his role. The US is by far the biggest ally in NATO. US economy is over half of the total NATO economy, so the other 31 are smaller together than the United States when it comes to the overall size of the economy. So I think it is important that this ally, which for so many years was spending much more on defense than the Europeans and the Canadians in aggregate, is keeping that pressure on.
After pressure from the US last year, member states have agreed to start spending 5% of their GDP on defense. Hegseth and Rutte say that's the most important first step to strengthen NATO. Arian Pasdar, NTD News.
Ukraine launched a barrage of drones on Moscow today, hitting an oil refinery in Russia's capital. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the strikes were a response to an attack that damaged a nearly 1,000-year-old monastery in Kyiv.
We do not want this war, and we never wanted it. Everyone knows this, and our partners know it, and we definitely do not want Ukraine to burn because of the enemy. But if Ukraine burns, your Moscow will burn. Therefore, we emphasize once again, it is time to end the aggression. It is time to end this war.
In addition to the drones targeting Moscow, Ukraine's military said it struck an oil depot in Russia's southern Rostov region and 2 bridges. Russia's defense ministry said more than 500 drones were shot down across the country. Moscow's mayor said 180 were downed around the Russian capital. The most recent exchange comes more than 4 years after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Zelensky added he believed it was necessary to increase pressure on Russia to end the war. Here's the Ukrainian president speaking at today's NATO defense ministers meeting.
The president of the United States is very clear about increasing pressure on Russia to end this terrible war Russia has brought against Ukraine and all of Europe. And this is also the shared position of all G7 leaders. We are grateful for this unity. We have the tools, and they are strong enough to put Russia on a path where diplomacy becomes the only choice. We all see that Putin is now relying on one lasting thing, constant missile attacks. And he has ballistic missiles, so we need anti-ballistic capabilities.
The White House is bidding farewell to a plane used as Air Force One. The Boeing 747-200 has a storied past. Over the past 35 years, this Air Force One jet has carried every single president, starting from George H.W. Bush in 1990. It has visited countries around the world from Iraq and Cuba to China and Australia. This morning, the Boeing plane made its last landing at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. This comes as 3 new 747-800s are set to take on the role as Air Force One. One of them is a luxury jet donated by the government of Qatar. It's currently undergoing modification by the Air Force. Earlier reports say it's set to be delivered no later than this summer. Boeing will spend at least 2 years modifying the 2 other new planes. It's not clear what is happening to the old Air Force One planes. The Air Force says they will remain part of the fleet. The biggest names in soccer continue to shape the World Cup storylines. Cristiano Ronaldo's record 6th World Cup got off to a frustrating start one day after Lionel Messi scored a hat-trick for Argentina. The 41-year-old Portuguese captain was held scoreless as Portugal settled for a surprising 1-1 draw against Congo, which earned its first ever World Cup goal and point. Meanwhile, England got the result it wanted. Harry Kane scored twice in a 4-2 victory over Croatia, tying England's all-time World Cup scoring record with 10 career tournament goals. Jude Bellingham added the go-ahead goal, and Marcus Rashford sealed the win. Elsewhere, Luis Diaz scored and assisted as Colombia beat World Cup debutant Uzbekistan 3-1, and Ghana edged Panama 1-0 on a dramatic stoppage time winner. And U.S. agencies have seized more than 50 drones near FIFA World Cup sites since the start of the tournament last week. The Federal Aviation Administration has barred drones from flying over World Cup 2026 matches and related fan events across the United States. Homeland Security Department said there have been more than 150 incidents of drones in prohibited airspace at 8 game locations, including 36 incidents in Atlanta. Drone operators can face fines of up to $100,000 along with criminal charges. The drone will be also confiscated. And is the U.S. ready for the 2026 FIFA World Cup? Joining us now to discuss this in studio is Santiago Vidal-Caval, policy analyst at the Manhattan Institute. So Santiago, so good to have you here in person. Welcome. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm pretty good. You know, it's been a couple days and a week actually now of full soccer, so I'm pretty happy about it. Yeah, I really like soccer. I watch it a lot. Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. You wrote a paper on this, a report. What do you consider as being prepared and not being prepared? Just explain that for us. What is your benchmark in terms of metrics for success of being prepared?
Well, the U.S. World Cup is going to be one of the largest in history. In fact, when we compare it against other editions, the U.S. World Cup is going to be almost double to the most attended one, which was the U.S. 1994 one. So in all those metrics, we're saying this is going to be a very successful event. In other metrics, I think that the U.S. could have better prepared in many areas: infrastructure, immigration, transit, where people are going to stay. All of these things are incredibly important now that the event is running. And the question is whether we're going to sustain it for a month more of the event.
Is that the biggest concern, whether it can be sustained? What are some of the concerns that you have right now about this?
Well, currently, the first thing that we need to take into consideration is how are the 7 million people going to get here to the United States? So that's the first point. And there was an immigration bottleneck in many areas. Many of the countries that qualify enter through visa allied agreements like ESTA, but others have to get, the visa tourist of B2 and B1s. Those are very, very important. And there are many places around the world where there are delays in the processing, that fans had to wait months to get their visas. So that's a very important step. How are people going to get here? Now, the second question is, have we really understood tourism culture? And have we expected people to just come here for 3 days or for actually staying way longer? And there are many places around the U.S. that have really understood this, but there are some other host cities that have made it very difficult for tourists to stay here and have a good tournament.
Do you have any examples on the visa issue, or do you have any ideas of how the U.S. can improve on what it's doing currently?
Well, the U.S. passed something called the FIFA Pass on visas, which is if you have a ticket, you can go to the embassy and you can ask for an expedited visa. This is an important step, but we really don't have benchmark or numbers to know how much capacity increased, or if we really were able to get everybody that we wanted to get a visa to come here to the tournament and then leave.
So has it been effective at all? To what degree is the effectiveness of the FIFA Pass?
Well, it has been effective in the sense that there are many consulates and embassies around the world, especially, for example, ones in Mexico, that had 14 months appointments to get a tourist visa. And when you think about it, 14 months is a huge time. Whenever you buy your ticket 6 months before the game and you need your ticket to get a visa, then the math doesn't add up. But when you think about it, if the FIFA Pass were actually, if many tourists were able to get the FIFA Pass and were able to come here with their visas and get it on time, then the FIFA Pass is effective. But we're going to know this whenever the State Department releases the numbers next year of how the processing went during the last couple months.
Okay, so moving on from that slightly, what is your assessment on security right now? Are there enough law enforcement personnel during these events?
I think this is a critical point, and we can see this because previous host editions like Qatar and Brazil have deployed massive security to many of the areas. And while many places around the U.S. have done some security deployments, I think that we're still away from the benchmark that I would like to see personally on many security deployments, especially here, for example, in New York City, as the tournament continues to concentrate into the city, because the final is going to be hosted here, and there are many host cities that are going to stop hosting games after some of the qualifying rounds. As the tournament continues to go, I think we should ramp up security. And there is great studies for example, from Brazil, that link high security deployment to low crime during the events. If we don't have enough security to actually protect tourists, but also the people that are here, Americans, we might see a spike in crime in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, so your wish to meet your benchmark of enforcement, is that coming from a place of potential threats that could happen if we don't meet that benchmark, or have there been examples already as a result of not meeting your benchmark?
Well, there is a great example. I'm going to tell you. Kansas City is one of the cities in the U.S. that have the highest rate of violent crime in the United States. In fact, the England team got their equipment stolen in Kansas City last week. It was, I believe, $13 million worth of equipment that they got stolen. And this is things that we could have avoided. These were warning signs that we knew that there were some cities around the U.S. that had high crime, and that we knew the indicators, we knew the statistics, and we had to fix those things before hosting the biggest event in the world.
Are there any cyber threats at all?
Yes, there are. There has been a constant attack on cybersecurity in the last years in the United States, especially in energy, water, and infrastructure that we have been able to reduce in the last couple of years. But, we're considering that the U.S. is in international conflict right now. We have international alerts on the top. And if really any enemy of the United States wanted to do us harm during this month, they could do so in cybersecurity. That's one of the biggest points right now.
Yeah, that is not good. That should be a big concern. Okay, Talk to us about transportation and infrastructure. Are they holding up in these cities, host cities?
So let me put it in this example. The United States, during the summer months, it's already one of the busiest seasons for transit, especially aerial transit. And we cannot expect fans to take a train ride from Boston to Miami to go watch a game if they have 2 tickets. It's simply not viable for many. So air travel, it's the most reliable source. During the most busy season for the United States air travel, we already move around 3 million people in the busiest days. Let's add on top of that 7 million tourists that are coming here and that are traveling within cities. I don't know yet if we're going to be able to hold that, but we might see delays on airports and in many airlines if we don't prepare well enough in the next weeks, especially towards the end of the tournament.
So when you bring up tickets, I think of affordability. How is it on that front?
Tickets are expensive this year. I think many Americans have felt that, and also tourists. We know that tickets are expensive, but we also know that this is what it's worth. This is the biggest stage on the earth. And I think that the matter of affordability, at least in policy, it's whether we have made the cities as affordable as they can to host these events. And many places like New York City, we could have had cheaper hotels if we wanted to, but City Council and City Hall have made it impossible for us to pass short-term rental agreements in the last couple of months to expand Airbnb capacity after essentially they killed it in 2018 and 2021. So we have made it more difficult to make it affordable here in the city with removing Airbnbs, not expanding the hotel supply, and things like that.
Okay, so out of all that we talked about today, the visa situation, affordability, transport, cybersecurity, physical security, what do you think should be the priority? Even in the issues that we haven't discussed, what is the priority right now for the U.S. should tackle?
Well, I think the priority is to learn from the things that we could be doing better for next editions, especially for something like the Olympics in 2028. But the most important part is for us to make sure that whatever tourist is here first enjoys the event and then leaves. Second, for example, that we don't increase visa overstays over the next month. Second, that we can control security and that we can use smart deployment of police to make sure that there is no mass crimes or any crowds that go crazy whenever a game wins or loses or things like that. And that we can make sure that we learn from our mistakes in policy to expand the U.S. capacity to host tourist events like this.
So there's a number of host cities. Is there any city that is doing a bit better that you would like to use as an example of what the U.S. should be doing?
I really like Houston and Dallas. I think they're doing a great job. I went to the Houston Fan Fest the other day, and I think they're doing a great job at hosting it. In policy-wise, it's one of the 2 growing cities in the U.S., and they have done very well to adapt to tourism. While they're very car-dependent, I think that they do have a good shot at hosting one of the best games there.
So I want to make a comparison to the 1994 World Cup, but you said earlier this one is much bigger than that one, so maybe it's apples and oranges. But how does the performance so far this year compare to 1994?
I think that we are apples and oranges. I think we have learned so much from that moment, but also that soccer is more famous now in the U.S. People like soccer more. They're more excited about it. It has become a more popular sport, especially with Major League Soccer. And I do think that the ability to host our national league like Major League Soccer has allowed us to have these mega events in many stadiums, to host 70,000 people, 80,000 people at the same time, and make sure they enter, they enjoy a game, and they leave. To make sure that we take advantage of this economic windfall. For New York City, that's going to be a $3.3 billion economic windfall. And that's huge that we take advantage of that. And for example, one way that New York City hasn't taken advantage of it is by giving away to New Jersey a bunch of tourism that we could be hosting here in New York City if we had Airbnb laws that were very helpful. Some other ways that we could have better prepared, for example, was the $98 ticket from from Penn Station to MetLife. It's an exorbitant amount to have a $98 ticket, and it was $150, and because of outrage, they decreased it.
I just thought of something as you were speaking. I just remembered the DHS shutdown was over 100 days. I think it was 115 days or something. Do you think that had any impact at all on preparedness of the U.S.?
It might be tough to know, but there was a grant that was given by Congress to many agencies in the U.S. It was a $625 million grant. And when you put it in comparison to what many other host nations have spent, Qatar spent billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars preparing for the World Cup. Brazil also spent billions of dollars, South Africa as well. And we only invested from Congress at least $625 million. Much of the responsibility was left to states and to the city host. So I do think that in terms of DHS and other agencies, whether we were prepared or not, it really matters on the fact of funding as well.
So we've been talking about what the U.S. needs to do to make sure this event is enjoyable for fans. But what is on the what is at stake right now for the U.S.? Why does it need to make sure that this event goes smooth? Is its image on the world stage at stake? What is it?
So I do think that there's a huge diplomatic aspect here. Soft diplomacy is huge for the United States right now. First, my 2 points. The first one is the U.S. have had a rocky immigration narrative in the last year. Many places around the U.S. don't like what's going on with immigration, and some others do, and I think that's fair. But what we can unite all of us right now is that we could be hosting a World Cup that invites the world, but make sure that follows our immigration laws. And I think that that's what happened in the last weeks. Whenever we hear about immigration scandals, are we really hearing about immigration scandals, or are we hearing about immigration laws being applied correctly? I think that that's the first point, is we can invite the world, but respect our laws here in the United States. And the second one is soft diplomacy. Many presidents of many nations are coming here to the United States to see the games. Mark Rubio was the other day, I believe, with the president of Paraguay. The president of Ecuador was watching the game against Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast. So I think that this is an incredible moment for soft diplomacy here in the United States for the Trump administration.
Okay, well said. I just want to end with this question. Besides the U.S., who are you rooting for in the World Cup? Who do you think is going to win the Golden Boot?
Well, I think that the U.S. played magnificently against Paraguay, and I would be very, very worried if they played against Spain. Spain is my team, apart from the United States. If the United States plays as well as they played with Paraguay with Spain, I would be worried about it.
Okay, great. Sounds good. It's been a pleasure to speak with you today, Santiago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Zelensky also says that Ukraine and Germany signed an agreement to develop an anti-ballistic missile defense system together. And it took 53 years for New York City to get a ticker tape parade for the New York Knicks. Sadly, many fans weren't able to see it in person. NTD's Sean Marshall spoke with some of the fans in the streets of Manhattan, New York.
People were lining up before sunrise to make it to the Knicks ticker tape victory parade. Mayor Zoran Mamdani has predicted that the parade might be one of the biggest such events in the city's history. So big that thousands of fans were unable to make it within viewing distance of the parade. But most fans remained in good spirits.
This is just awesome. I mean, look at everyone here. Obviously, this area right here, there's not as many people, but you saw the streets over there. You saw the streets over there as well. It's absolutely crazy here. Everyone's got Knicks fever in New York, and that's all we can ask for. It's been 53 years, no more.
Knick love right here. New York City love. All day. All day. They're outside enjoying the parade, enjoying the vibes, the people. You know, this is how New York is. My brothers are here. We brought the custom Knicks car outside. You know how it is.
The confetti rained down on the NBA champions and Knicks fans that lined the streets, and luckily the parade did not get rained out.
Go Knicks. I came here from Baltimore. It's a good drive, and it was worth it. I expected a good crowd. It's a good turnout. Kind of upset that you can't actually see the parade from back here on Church Street. But you know what? It's a good time down there. Great vibe, good crowd.
Viewing pens along the route were full with thousands of fans less than 3 hours before the procession started. New York Governor Kathy Hochul also made it into the parade. The parade ended with a ceremony at City Hall where the team received keys to the city from the mayor. The NYPD commissioner says the crowd numbers even top that of New Year's Eve celebrations in Times Square. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
A new award-winning documentary is inspiring audiences across the globe. The newest premiere of Unbroken, the untold story of Shen Yun's screening in Los Angeles. The eye-opening investigative film can now be seen on multiple streaming platforms in 14 languages. NTD's David Lam has more from the red carpet at AMC Theater at the Grove in LA.
We're here at the red carpet event for the Unbroken film, and the Los Angeles audience is hearing from the performers themselves, from the stage to the big screen and now home screen.
The film Unbroken, the untold story of Shen Yun, brings to light the perseverance of a New York-based dance company in the face of threats from the Chinese Communist Party.
I think there's a lot of things that this film touches upon, but I think the most important thing for your normal American would be how much the Chinese Communist Party has an influence on what we see and hear here in America.
The 7-time award-winning film gives inside look at performers and their families as they navigate escalating smear campaigns, threats, and interference linked to the CCP. For more than 2 decades, Shen Yun has faced repeated attacks, from slashed tour bus tires to hoax bomb and death threats. Shen Yun's mission is to revive China's traditional, spiritually rooted culture from before the rise of communism.
Shen Yun's been around for 20 years, and this is the first time that we've had a film made about us. So for me, it really reflects the journey that I've been on with Shen Yun.
The performing arts group is also facing pressure on another front. In late 2022, Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping reportedly directed officials to defame Shen Yun using Western media outlets overseas. Following that, the New York Times published a series of articles attacking Shen Yun.
I'm really looking forward to seeing Shen Yun's story on the big screen, and everyone sees all of us on stage as dancers, but there's a lot of hard work and a lot of hardship that we face, actually a lot of challenges that is behind the scenes, and this movie is going to show the audience what that's like.
Audience members at the premiere commend Shen Yun's resilience as the company marks its 20th anniversary.
When they had certain artists talk about they had family members who were actually abused in China in camps and in some cases lost their lives, it's hard not to be moved by stories like that.
I feel very positive, and I'm amazed that these young people are standing in there for their own freedom and democracy.
The Los Angeles premiere marks the film going from theatrical screenings to homes nationwide. Anyone, anywhere can now watch. It's now on Apple TV in 4K, Amazon, Google Play, NTD Plus, and GJW. And it's already passed 1 million streams.
This is the entertainment capital of the world, Los Angeles, where all the motion pictures and big films are made. So the fact that we're able to have Unbroken on the big screen, it's really humbling, and it's an honor to be here.
This is like our 4th or 5th screening around North America, and the fact that it's getting this much attention and a lot of people are being able to see it, really excited for that.
Well, it's pretty special because even though I'm from New York, I always really like Cali. I love being in California, the good weather, especially LA. It's pretty nice.
Unbroken already screened in Canada, New York, Washington, D.C., Texas, and Taiwan.
This latest stop in the film's global tour is a testament to the artist's perseverance in the face of pressure from the CCP. In Los Angeles, David Lamb, NTD News.